There are three kinds of powers the Fatui Harbingers have that actually translate well into our world: social, economic, and scientific. The Fatui Harbingers are slowly but surely introduced more and more into Genshin. It's finally time to dive back into the original source material and begin making some intelligent guesses on who the first four Harbingers could be. Welcome to Who Are the Top 4 Harbingers, where today we'll be using the context of the Commedia dell'arte to complete the Fatui Harbinger hierarchy. Disclaimer: this video is not indicative of any final product and is a theory in the end. Please be warned. For context, the Fatui Harbingers are based off the Commedia dell'arte, a form of Italian theater that primarily uses masked stock characters and archetypes. We have 9 Harbingers known by name at the moment, and a full constellation wheel without proper numbering. If you've watched my 11 Harbingers, you already know who these 4 Harbingers are, but I wanted to give more context why these 4 specifically, who they are in the Commedia dell'arte, and how their Commedia dell'arte counterpart plays into their importance in the Fatui. So, without further ado, let's begin with the first Harbinger. Pierrot, the Jester. The crying mask tells the tale of a young man who was ignored and mocked by society, only to have the last laugh. Pierrot was first introduced to us in Genshin Impact 1.1 as the Jester, and now properly in 1.5 and 2.2 as Pierrot. However, while his name is derived from the PEDRELINO, I actually believe his writing inspirations mirror not only the PEDRELINO, but also the Arlecchino. In the Commedia dell'arte, both PEDRELINO and Arlecchino have close ties with one another, often being known as counterparts and their mutual interest for another stock character. In the Commedia, they are both known as Zani, who are clown acrobats, but most importantly also servants or low-status individuals. Both the Pierrot and the Harlequin play into the clown-like motif and definitely the irony that someone that's supposed to be lowly in the Commedia is one of the highest status in the Harbingers. But we can dissect this further. The PEDRELINO or Pierrot is an honest and simple-minded servant who was also known to be a victim of his fellow comedians. He began the culture of the sad and lonely clown we see in modern media today, the underlying tragedy in a character that's bombastic or extravagant. He is defined as melancholy, intrinsically alone, but also playful. This aspect of the PEDRELINO ties in with his backstory, the mocking mask, in which the mask's purpose is to hide one's expression from others. In the story, it states that the jester used to come from a faraway place that suffered because of the veil of sin, and therefore ushered in a tide of divine wrath, destruction, and foolishness. He failed to earn the favor of the previous ruler, as he was not as intelligent as the sages, and therefore he was unable to stop the cataclysm to come. Hence, he will instead become a fool and devote himself to Her Majesty, so that he can don his mask and witness the absurd callousness of the foundational principles of this world. Which means that much like his Commedia counterpart, Pierrot was also a worthy servant that earnestly was aware they were doing something wrong, but wasn't listened to. Therefore, reduced to just a measly clown, he became the victim of the other fools around him, which then follows through with his current status as a Harbinger and a follow-up inspiration, Arlecchino or the Harlequin. In the Commedia, the Harlequin is more spry and considered a diabolical buffoon. Unlike the lovable and serious Pierrot, the Arlecchino was more of a trickster and played into the devilish archetype we see in modern media. In the game, we know that Pierrot has a morbid sense of humor, no longer the prey but instead the predator. He was the superior of Nathan, who had orders for not only the release of the Tatsugami, but also the experimentation of its effects on the citizens of the Higi village. He was also ordering that Inazuman recruits from Yashiori Island will be brought over to Snezhnaya and have no innate value to the Fatui, but they would do just as fine as living test subjects. He also names Zatori the doctor, despite knowing his experiments are meant to kill, not cure. He also sent Scaramouche to a mission without warning him back in the Unreconciled Stars event, and while yes, Scaramouche isn't human, even the Six stated that a warning would have been nice. We see that Pierrot carries himself with flair in the lights and the little joys of life. I could even guess that's where Scaramouche got his attitude. You just need to find the humor in all of it. On a side note, let's talk about his potential design in-game. miHoYo actually does reference most of the Commedia in the design of the Harbingers. Scaramouche wears dark clothes because Scaramuccia wore black Spanish dresses and a don, as well as the name Balladeer being used instead of the Little Skirmisher. Little being translated elsewhere like his height and temper. Senora carries extravagant jewelry and an air of importance, while Tartaglia has both an orange mask and orange hair resembling his Commedia counterpart. My guess is that Pierrot's main color palette will be primarily white, and his clothes are very flowy, similar to Azani's baggy pants and loose fabric. He'd wear a large blouse and long sleeves, and might actually be less dressed than Totore in terms of sophistication. But now we're going to the more theorizing side of this video. Harbingers 2, 3, and 4. Each needs to play an important role in keeping the politics and high status of the Harbingers. For my reasoning, it's because of what they can give to the Harbingers thematically. The current Harbingers we know in the game, Signora, Scaramouche, and Tartaglia, have been known to simply been following orders from their higher-ups. And we know that the reason the Fatui are feared isn't just because they're inhuman or are powerful, but instead they're political, economic, and scientific juggernauts that can't be beat by any other nation. By extension, that means that 2 to 4 need to have significant contributions to the long con of the Fatui's logistics. Now, these next 3 Commedia counterparts are actually interchangeable because we lack firm endgame knowledge. But I believe this is also why Il Capitano can't be part of Harbingers 2, 3, and 4. His archetype is known as an overall boaster and identity liar, which would break authenticity. If the Harbingers are anything, they're not lying about their status. We know that they do have child slaves somewhere in those facilities. So let's begin. The second Harbinger, Columbina, the Little Dove. I believe that Columbina is the second in command of Pierrot, known as the main intelligence network and consigliere unit of the Harbingers. She is known for her wisdom in manipulating and controlling the politics of how the Fatui are seen in other nations. I believe that it's through her vast connections that Pierrot finds Pantalone, Dottore, Signora, and Scaramouche. Columbina in the Commedia dell'arte is the mistress of the Harlequin and wife of Pierrot. She is a lowly maid that plays the trickery slave type. She is conniving, confident, and very flirtatious. On the other hand, however, she is known as being intellectual and rational, often regarded as the only intellect on stage. She is also known for her many disguises and ability to confuse other people. Now, while Columbina is a love interest, that won't be one-to-one in Genshin. It would make sense that she's just his closest confidant. If the constellations I present are true, both of them carried the tear-stricken constellation, meaning it could be possible they were both there to witness the cataclysm firsthand. As for endgame, I want to bring attention to the Mirror Maidens being a potential reflection of Columbina. Much like the Columbina in the Commedia, her posture is highly dignified, and she lures others using illusions. By extension, Columbina would fit a Hydro delusion since Hydro is the most manipulated element for creation. Her having a lot of disguises in the Commedia would mean that she is capable of creating illusory images, like Xingqiu's swords or even Mona's night sky if she so wishes. By extension, this means we will probably see her in Fontaine because her primary theme is deceit. Her being second in command would continue Pierrot's irony, that the Zani are the ones with the highest status. As for her design, it would be similar to Signora's in a way. Long flowy clothes with just a little more puppiness and weight to them that Signora's doesn't. Columbina's mask would be a half mask, perhaps even a masquerade mask if the bet she appears formally in Fontaine is to be trusted. The third of the Fatui Harbingers, Pantalone, the greedy merchant. When I first did my original video on Pantalone, I never realized just how influential he really is in the Fatui. While not having a vision, Pantalone was responsible for keeping the Fatui rich. He rented the whole of the Goth Grand Hotel in Mondstadt indefinitely, which is the most luxurious hotel in the entirety of the country. He also has a Fatui spy under the name of Landa who wanted to destroy Mondstadt's wine industry, which means that Pantalone isn't only establishing more branches in other places, but also actively trying to sabotage the biggest monopolies in the nation. In Liyue's Northland Bank, we hear that Pantalone was credited for being the brilliance and foresight of economics in Snezhnaya. The fact that Snezhnaya has one of the best banks in the land of commerce is definitely a feat. In the Commedia dell'arte, the resemblance is almost one-to-one. Pantalone is known as a greedy merchant, but he never forgets a deal and his merit is based on his action. He is known for being petty and never forgets or forgives even the smallest of things. Coming from the land of not only commerce but also contracts, Pantalone's story is actually much more human than the rest of the Harbingers. He was not favored by the gods and therefore visionless, and in his life he was destitute and poor. His anger for the gods came out of defiance, and he demanded to know why, though money shouldn't mean anything to the gods, they dared steal it away from those that need it, along with every other ounce of power those greedy deities could possess. His contract to Pierrot was that he will make Snezhnaya into an economic powerhouse, the heart of gold that pumps money around the world. If Columbina was social control, we can see why Pantalone is the way he is, which is even more fascinating because out of all the Harbingers, his goal is actually the most human. While I said that the numbers are interchangeable amongst the other Harbingers, the reason I put him in number 3 is actually because of the Torre. They're close rivals and friends in the Commedia, but in Genshin, Pantalone makes it his promise to Pierrot that they will become the ultimate financial controller in the whole world. We know that one reason the Torre joins Pierrot was because the Torre asked for sufficient resources for his experiments to manufacture a god. Pantalone would have to be before the Torre for this to be fulfilled. Another connection he has with the Torre is that he's visionless, which means that his will and power alone was allegedly enough to fuel a delusion, something we have never even seen or heard possible in the game. Pantalone's color scheme would be red, which is his Commedia's main colors. Red is also prevalent in Chinese culture, which symbolizes happiness, success, and good fortune, which is why I'm reminded of Ampaos whenever I see these things. And that leads me to the last Fatui Harbinger of the 4, Il Dottore, the Doctor. The man who deems human life as nothing but a precious resource. Now, I covered the Torre in his own video before, but I did want to include him here because I believe his presence as a head of scientific advancements plays a large role in why he's high on the list. The Wise Doctor's opinion states that he was once casted away from his hometown after he shared his views on how human life can be artificially augmented. The name Pinyin also comes from a gear in a machine, which makes sense. While his hometown was never disclosed, it's fair to say it might be in Sumeru. In-game, we know that he's experimented with human beings before for God knows how long, and we know that the Archon Residue Project, the Child Experiments, and the Ruin Guard Factory were under his supervision. But I also believe that he's high up because he would have a hand in manipulating A's prototype, the Kunikuzushi. For all his talk about human enhancement, it would do his character injustice not to experiment on the vessel of an actual god to see just how it works. We know that the Fatui succeeded in not only undoing the seals of the Electro Archon, but also enhancing the Kunikuzushi. Scaramouche could easily be the Torre's blueprint for what an enhanced human can do, which is why I put him at number 4. He'd need to be higher than Scaramouche for this to work, and Pulcinella is already 5th. 4 is also a number known as unlucky because it's closely related to death. This correlation works with the Torre's lack of regard of human life and the child experiment. The Torre seems to be a character filled with irony and opposites, which makes sense because the moniker Doctor usually entails something positive when heard at first glance. Besides his name, he also has the following contradictions. His Commedia dell'arte counterpart resembles the educated elite who talk a lot on stage and is often ignored by the other actors. In Genshin, this is actually the other way around, where the Torre doesn't really like talking a lot unless he's alone having a monologue, and he hates when other people are saying more than what they're doing. His mask in the Commedia is known to be 1/3 mask, while in-game it's a 2/3 mask. In design, he was known to sport a lot of black from head to toe, while in-game, his design is primarily white and gray. He calls vision wielders self-inflated fools, but he also wants to inflate humanity's power by enhancing them limb by limb. The Torre's division hones in the scientific strength of the Fatui and why they're feared. An interesting analysis when considering the Il Dottore is that the Dottore of the Commedia isn't actually an intelligent character, but rather a mockery of the fake intellectuals who claim to know the sciences but are actually just bluffing. It's possible that the Torre in Genshin also works through this philosophy. He brags on and on that he will create a being that is better than the gods by enhancing human life, when in reality he's still only halfway done with his experiment. It is something to ponder on just to what extent is his real intelligence versus just morbid fascination of the art. Because we know that the Torre is willing to lie for power. He's done this before. He was renowned as a hero of Mondstadt for killing Ursa the Drake, but actually manipulated the dragon to keep Mondstadt indebted to the Fatui. Because of his intelligence and background, several people on my other videos noted that he could have an animo delusion. His ideals are free as the wind and the Torre carries himself with no limitations, plus the projectile bluish syringe. Another is that he could have a physical base delusion that instead buffs his more humane aspects. Or he could have no delusion at all and just focus on giving other human beings buffs, like turning them into a robot. Consent, on the other hand, is a very different topic. Just imagine you're a massive robot. The 4 Harbingers I showed may not be the strongest in terms of strength, given that 2 of them are confirmed visionless humans. But at the same time, strength shouldn't be just about how strong they are in combat. Viewing a character's status in this context involves how influential and powerful they are socially, and the fact that these people may have started so weak before arriving to the Fatui is honestly frightening. These 4 will be the epitome of human ambition that just wasn't acknowledged by the god. But it wasn't like they needed their love anyway. My name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.